Okay, Laurie, let's move to me. So welcome. My name is Phil Ruge-Jones. I'm thrilled that you're here and joining us in this workshop. This is the Story Theater workshop, and I'm the person who put it together. But there's 3 other people who'll be just as involved in being on the screen as I am. But especially if you're a first timer with the network, I want to tell you we're really thrilled that you're with us. I want to give you just a little orientation. It might be helpful if you're not one of the 4 storytellers. If for now you mute your video, and definitely if you mute your microphone. So you'll still see us, we won't see you, and it'll make for a cleaner looking screen, I think. So we're going to try that. Later on, you'll have opportunities to turn those on if you want. Throughout the talk, you might have noticed that while Sarah was doing her wonderful talk a little bit ago, that people were chatting. If you're new to Zoom and want to know how that works, there's an image that looks something like this down at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, it'll kick up another box where you can type messages in. And there's a place where it says, type message here. You want to make sure you're responding to everyone and not just yourself, or you can chat with somebody else alone, like say, this is so lame, what's going on here? You could say that and I wouldn't hear you until I watch the tape, and then I can see that you said that right when I was talking. So that would be a function you can use throughout the storytelling. And actually, after each storyteller does their thing, I will invite you to write a few comments to them to give the storytellers immediate feedback. Later on, so this is the process. We'll have 4 storytellers who will tell us their telling of Exodus 1 and 2. 2 of those will be via video. So they're with us live, but it's a pre-recorded one was their selection. And then 2 of us will be telling live. And after each storyteller finishes, you'll have that 2 or 3 minutes to write comments. Things, I think they're nice if they're appreciative comments. I really thought this was an interesting translation, or man, that characterization of the mother, that was just brilliant. But you could also ask questions and say, what were you going for in this part? When all of us have gone through that, which I think will take about 30 to 40 minutes, then the panelists will be on the screen together, and we'll talk amongst ourselves about what we noticed in each other's tellings as people who've dedicated a fair amount of time to this text or this passage. And then finally, with about half of the time we'll probably have about 25 minutes left. There's a little box at the bottom that's like this. It says participants under it. And if you click on that, you get a little box and it'll include your name on it. One of the things you can do is you look for, I think there are 3 dots, and you click on it and you can do things, or no, it'll say more, and you can do things like raise, oh no, I see it, my bad. It's down at the bottom, there's a little blue hand, and if you click it, you'll raise your hand and we'll know you want to talk, so Laurie can help us find the people who want to talk. There's going to be 73 people, so that's as many as 3 screens of people that will be occupying our meeting. And so it's hard to see everybody's hands if we don't use that little technological thing. I'll remind you of that when we get to it. But let's say a prayer and then we'll go to our tellings. Holy and gracious God, we pray that your spirit might hover over us and that you might hold us together even as we are far apart. And that through the listening to this story in 4 different voices, we might hear you more clearly and might live as you would have us live. Bless the story, bless the hearing, bless the time together, in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Oh, and bless the technology, please. So, Laurie, if you want to do the first, get the first one queued. Our first telling is by Suzanne Stock.
These are the names of the sons who went to Egypt with Jacob along with their families: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. Now, Jacob's family numbered 70 in all, with Joseph already in Egypt. Then Joseph and all of his brothers and all of that generation died. But the Israelites had been exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly, increased abundantly, and became so numerous, the whole land was filled with Israelites. Then a new king came into power in Egypt, who did not know about Joseph. "Look," he said to his people, "the Israelites are becoming much too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous, and if war breaks out, could join our enemies and fight against us, leave the country." And so they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor. They built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh, but the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labor in brick and mortar and all kinds of work in the fields. In all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. Then the king of Egypt called the midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, and said to them, "When you assist the Hebrew women in childbirth and observe them at delivery, if it is a boy baby, kill him. But if it is a girl, you may let her live." Now, the midwives feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had commanded them. They let the boys live. So the people increased and grew. And Pharaoh summoned the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live?" Midwives answered Pharaoh, "Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive." So the people increased. And because the midwives feared God, God gave them families of their own. Then the king of Egypt gave this command to all of his people: "Every boy baby born to the Hebrews you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl baby live." Now, there was a man of the house of Levi who married a Levite woman. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son. And when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with bitumen and pitch. She placed the baby in it and put it among the reeds along the banks of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Now, Pharaoh's daughter came down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants walked along the riverbank. She saw the basket and sent her maidservant to get it for her. When she opened it, she saw the babe, and he was crying inconsolably. She took pity on him. "This must be one of the Hebrew babies," she said. And then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse him for you?" "Yes, go," she answered. And so the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse him for me, and I will pay you wages." And so she took the baby home and nursed him. And when the child grew older, she took him back to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her child. She named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water."
Excellent. So thank you so much, Suzanne. It's kind of scary watching yourself, though, isn't it? So we invite you now to all go to your chat function at the bottom, click on that little gray box, and then to the right, you'll see a place where you can type messages here, and you can do that. And let's tell Suzanne some of the things we appreciated about her telling. Can't even read anything quick enough. Kathy Maxwell. Give me just about 30 seconds more to wrap that up. And thank you so much. You're like flooding the Suzanne. We've never gotten this much feedback for a single telling. This is wonderful. We may like this new, there's all sorts of new dimensions of this technology, that, like having Sarah comment to us about her own performance or her keynote and our reflections on it while she's giving it. It was just a fascinating experience for me. So, amen. Some things work better virtually than face to face. Crazy to think that. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad, Dennett, you were able to get your problems resolved. So, and be with us now. So, our next person is Simone. If you've been watching the activities of the day, you know her as our MC. Those of us who are on the planning committee know her as the one who is had brutally tough tasks piled upon her. I want to watch her when she tells that part of the story. She's the one who has been our guru for the technology and helped us find a way through it, not only telling us what needed to be done, but often being the one to do it. And we're so thankful for her. But among the many gifts we're thankful to her for is her storytelling. And so Lori's gonna give her the screen. And then once that happens, then Simone, you can tell us your story.
Thank you, Phil. When Joseph, well, that didn't start out. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Okay. When Jacob went to Egypt, his son Joseph was already there. So Jacob took his 11 other sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Issachar, Judah, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Gad, Asher, and Naphtali. Altogether, Jacob took 70 children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren with him. Well, eventually, Joseph and his brothers and everyone else in that generation had died. But those Israelites, they were fertile. They became so numerous that the whole region of Goshen was full of them. Well, many years later, a new king of Egypt came to power. He didn't know what Joseph had done for Egypt, and he said to the Egyptians, "There are too many of those Israelites in our country. They're becoming more powerful than we are. If we don't outsmart them, their families will keep growing larger. And if our country goes to war, they could easily join the side of our enemies and escape from Egypt." Well, the Egyptians put slave bosses in charge of the Israelites, and they tried to work them so hard. The bosses forced them to build cities in Pithom and Ramses, where the king could store his supplies. But even though the Israelites were oppressed, their families grew larger and they took up more of the land. Because of this, the Egyptians hated them worse than before, and they forced them to build bricks and mortar and work in the field. I mean, they were so cruel that they made their lives miserable by working them so hard. Finally, the king of Egypt called in 2 midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, and he told them, when you help the Hebrew women give birth, and you see that a baby boy is being born, kill him. If it's a girl, let her live. Well, the 2 women, they were faithful to God, and they did not let the baby boys die. They did not kill them, even though the king told them to. But then the king called them in again and said, why are you letting the baby boys live? And the 2 midwives said, the Hebrew women, they are vigorous, and they have their babies much quicker than Egyptian women. Yeah. By the time we arrive, their babies are already born. The Hebrews, their families kept growing. So finally, the king of Egypt gave a command to everyone in the nation. As soon as a Hebrew baby boy is born, throw him into the Nile River. But if it's a girl, let her live. There was a man from the Levi tribe who married a woman from the same tribe, and she later became pregnant, and you guessed it, she had a boy. He was beautiful, and she kept him inside for 3 months. But when she could no longer keep him hidden, she made a basket out of reeds and covered it in tar, put him in the basket and placed it in the tall grass along the riverbank. Well, the baby's older sister, she stood at a distance so she could see what would happen to him. But in about that time, one of the king's daughters came down to the river to take a bath, and her servant women were walking alongside the riverbank. She saw the basket, and she sent one of the women to pull it out of the water. And when she saw the baby, she felt sorry for him because he was crying. And she said, this must be one of the Hebrew babies. And then at once, that baby's older sister, she came up and said, would you like me to find a Hebrew woman to nurse the baby for you? And the king's daughter said, well, yes. So the girl brought the baby's mother to the king's daughter. And the king's daughter asked her to take care of the child and I'll pay you. The baby's mother carried the child home and took care of him. Well, when he was old enough, she took him to the king's daughter who adopted him. And she said, I named him Moses because he was pulled out of the water. Word of God for the people of God.
All right. So if all of you, thank you so much, Simone. That was wonderful. If all of you could send Simone some love in the comments about what you really appreciated about her telling, she'll be able to get through all that. We're all going to be reading it at 9 o'clock at night when we finally can sit down, because you're giving us so much feedback. That's so rare. That's so wonderful.
Excuse me, how do I get the comment sent?
You hit return.
Oh, thank you.
Good question.
What type of that? Oh no.
If the comment goes, do you still see it at the bottom of your?
Nope. Nope, it pops right above it.
Huh. Okay, well,
Who am I talking to?
this is Linda Abe.
I don't
see
see
your
the,
comment, Linda.
Excuse me?
I don't see your comment. If you
Right, so I've made a comment. I've checked everyone
okay.
and then enter,
Mhm.
return.
Mhm.
Yep. That
It
should do
won't
it.
go. It won't go.
Oh,
I don't see a return.
Oh,
you're on your it's on your computer. It's a button that you hit to start a new line, or it's called enter.
Oh.
So it's just the typewriter,
It's not on the screen.
right?
Right, okay,
So try some of your keyboard functions. Like if you would, what you would click to, or what you would hit to go to another line in the
Right.
paragraph.
Or if it's less frustrating, you can just say out loud what you said, because we're all
Sure.
listening to you.
Phil, you might want to make sure people might need to be in the body of the text. Their cursor needs to be in the text when
Yeah,
they
you
hit
need to be-
enter.
Your cursor should be blinking next to the T of type message here.
okay.
Right.
All right, well, thank you. That's a lot of good feedback once again. Lucky Simone.
This is Lori, the host. I just have a helpful hint for you. If you'd like to save all these comments, at the bottom of the chat box, it says everyone in the blue box, and then to the right, there's the word file if we wanted to add something. But then there's the 3 dots and ellipsis. If you click on that, you have an option to save the chat. So you can save the chat and you can read everything later that's been typed in this whole thing. There you go.
And if I might add, Lori,
Yeah.
make sure you name it, because if you save chat again in another session, it'll overwrite it.
Oh,
Learn.
thank you, Simone. Helpful hint. Pro tip. Great.
And like if you save it more than once, you'll lose your first in one meeting. Like if I save it now and then say, oh, I'm going to save it after my story, I would lose it if I don't give it a different name, right? Okay.
Right, you'll save over.
All right, so our next storyteller is Jason Chestnut, who is going to be telling us digitally. So our wonderful host will pull him up and we'll watch him.
These are the names, Mecham Mamre, the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, Israel, along with their households. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Zebulun, Issachar, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Asher, Gad. The total number of people born to Jacob was 70. Then Joseph died, he and his brothers and his sister and that entire generation. But the Israelites were fruitful and prolific. They grew dramatically so that the land was filled with them. But a new king came to power in Egypt who didn't know Joseph. He said to his people, the Israelite people are now larger in number and stronger than we are. Come on, let's be smart with them and deal with them. Otherwise, they'll only grow in number. And then, in the case of a war, they'll join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. So, as a result, the Egyptians put foremen of forced work gangs over the Israelites to harass them with hard labor.
Break ball. No break.
The more they were oppressed, the more the Israelites grew and spread, so that the Egyptians began to look upon the Israelites with disgust and dread. So the Egyptians enslaved the Israelites, made their lives miserable with hard labor, making mortar and bricks, doing field work, and all other kinds of work that they forced upon them. The king of Egypt, Pharaoh, said to two Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, when you are helping the Hebrew women give birth and you see the baby being born, if it's a boy, kill it. If it's a girl, let her live. Now, the midwives respected God. They didn't obey Pharaoh's order. They let the baby boys live. So Pharaoh called the midwives to him again and said, Why are you doing this? Why are you letting the baby boys live? And Shiphrah and Puah said to Pharaoh, because Hebrew women aren't like Egyptian women. They're vigorous. They give birth before we can even get there. So God treated the midwives well, and the people kept on multiplying and became very strong. And because the midwives respected God, God gave them households of their own. Then Pharaoh gave an order to all his people, throw every baby boy born to the Hebrews into the Nile River. But you can let the girls live. Now a man from Levi's household, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant, and she gave birth to a son. And she saw that he was healthy and beautiful. So she hid him for 3 months. And when she couldn't hide him any longer, she took a reed basket and she sealed it with black tar, and she placed the child in the basket and set the basket among the reeds at the riverbank. The child's older sister stood watch nearby at the riverbank to see what would happen to him. Pharaoh's daughter came down to the river to bathe while her women servants walked alongside the river. And she saw the basket among the reeds, and she sent one of her servants to bring it to her. She opened it. She saw the child. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This must be one of the Hebrew children. And then the baby's sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, would you like me to find one of the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you? And Pharaoh's daughter agreed, yes, do that. So the girl went and called the child's own mother. And she came, and Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child and nurse it for me, and I'll pay you for your work. So the woman, his mother, took the child and nursed it. And after he had grown up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted him as her own. She named him Moshe, Moses, because she said, I pulled him, Moshe, from the water.
All right. Please give Jason your feedback and comments in the chat function. We're 70 strong, y'all. That's great. Thank you for lifting up Dinah. Oops, I just sent it to Madeline.
Yeah, that's true. It's not intuitive.
You got one more minute. Yeah, you had the extra stuff, so that. Good. All right. Thank you all. I am Phil Ruge-Jones, and I'm doing the last one, which means I have everybody else's presentations in my head, and I want to steal things from them already. And that might mean something in my bag gets knocked out, but that's all right. And I want to use more of my body, so I'm going to back up a little bit. You won't see my face as much as you got to with the other folks, but you'll see me a little more. The people of Israel were fruitful and prolific in the land of Egypt. They multiplied and spread so that they filled the land. Now there arose in Egypt a Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph. And he said to his people, look, the people of Israel are more numerous and powerful than we are. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest in the event of war, they side with our enemies, fight against us, and escape from the land. So the Egyptians placed taskmasters over the Israelites who oppressed them in forced labor. They built supply cities for Pharaoh, Pithom and Ramesses. But the more that they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and grew, so that the Egyptians began to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians were brutal in the labors that they imposed on the Israelites. They forced them to work in brick and mortar and all the field labor. They were brutal in the tasks they imposed on them. Pharaoh said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was Puah and the other Shiphrah, when you act as midwives for the Hebrew women and see them on the birthing stool, If it's a boy, kill him. Huh? If it's a girl, she can live. Now, the Hebrew midwives feared God. So they didn't do what the king of Egypt required. Rather, they let the boys live. Pharaoh summoned the midwives and said, did I already say this? Why have you done this, allowing the boys to live? And they said, the Hebrew women, they're just not like the Egyptian women. They're vigorous, and they give birth before we even get there. So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people grew more numerous and more powerful. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Pharaoh commanded his people, any boy that is born to the Hebrews, throw him in the Nile. What? It's a girl? Well, she can live. Now, a man from the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she conceived, and she gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine baby, she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket, she plastered it with bitumen pitch, and she put him into the basket. And she placed the basket at the bank of the river among the reeds. His sister watched from a distance to see what would happen to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to the river to bathe. Her attendants were walking right on the bank. When she saw the basket, she sent one of them to bring it to her. She opened the basket, saw the child. He was crying, and she had compassion on it. Oh, look, this must be one of the Hebrew children, she said. And his sister came and said, would you like me to get a nurse from among the Hebrew women to nurse him for you? And the daughter of Pharaoh said, yes. And so she went and got the child's own mother. And the daughter of Pharaoh said, take this child and nurse him to me, and I will pay you wages. Mother took the child. She nursed him. Now, when the child had grown in years, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted him as her own son. And she said, I will call his name Moses, because I took him out through the waters. This is the story of our people.
And what a story it is. Thank you, Phil.
So now if you can give comments to Phil, he would appreciate it. And panelists, start thinking about what we might want to say to each other. Get as close as you can.
We also have a hand raised from Mary. I'm not sure if she still has a question or if it was earlier and I missed it. Sorry, Mary, if that was the case.
That was a long time ago.
Okay, sorry.
I think I was having trouble getting the chat done, but I think I've got it now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
This is part of the continuing ed dimension of this. We're all going to be way better in Zoom by tomorrow night. So, And that's an important tool to have these days in ministry.
Yes.
Get us right next to me.
All right. Yep. Yeah, the interaction with it is great.
All right, you can keep typing, but so can I invite everyone who is not one of the panelists to mute their audio and video, so that what will happen then is you'll see just the four of us on the screen. If you choose the, let's see, what's it called?
Speaker view.
Not the speaker view, the other one, the
Gallery view.
gallery view. You should be able to see all of us that don't mute. And so if you can do that, if you're not, you'll just be like standing on the side, paying attention. And all the storytellers can unmute themselves because we'll talk fluidly. Hands waved, hands raised went like physically for us four. If you want to say something is great. So while you're getting ready to do that, I'll say that Suzanne and I did a trial of this about 15 years ago because we were both at Lighting the Fire, which I think you host tonight.
Yes.
And we both were in line to tell a story, and I got up and told mine, and I also told the one she was going to tell, and she was right after me. And so that was maybe one of our first times we realized seeing different tellers tell right after each other is really an interesting kind of experience. So.
Right. Well.
Okay, so Suzanne, do you want to get us, so we have 45 minutes left in our workshop, so we'll talk to each other for about 25 minutes. And Lori, if you can keep track of that and cue me when it's time to move out, so we don't just spend the whole time talking, then we'll move it out to the rest of the participants and they can make comments or questions. So Suzanne, you have the floor.
The first thing that struck me there, I'm just going to start at the end of the story and the end of the Storytellers, was the drastic difference between how Jason and Phil embodied Pharaoh's daughter and Pharaoh's daughter's emotions. A completely different take on that, which I thought was interesting. You could speak to the emotions of Pharaoh's daughter.
I mean, I just think there's a lot of, that's just a great point as far as storytelling in general, is that there's so many different choices that you can make, right? Like, I feel like sometimes we get through a story like this and we forget that there are so many different characters that we need to make choices about before we tell from that perspective, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think for me personally, like anything connected to Pharaoh, which I saw in Phil's too, anything connected to Pharaoh is bad. Like it's dangerous. He's literally advocating genocide. And so for his daughter to come to Moses in that story, you're thinking, oh crap, right? Like this is not good. And so I just think that's a helpful thing because we oftentimes we're like earlier here at Phil and Lori's house, we were talking about Jesus. And Phil said, you know, like when he dies, and I jokingly said, spoiler alert, but like, yes, we obviously know what happens to Jesus, but I think our storytelling can only be improved by us just imagining, I don't know how this ends. When Pharaoh's daughter shows up, I'm not happy at all, I'm scared.
Yeah, so I'm thinking similar lines, that when you hear, just like when you hear it's a boy, you're supposed to go, oh, we've heard the story up till now. You don't want a boy to be born because those are the ones that are going to be under attack. That when you hear it's Pharaoh's daughter, you think, oh no, that like of all the people to show up, it's her. But then I want her to flip that, to say that, well, I understand that's your prejudice, but I'm going to be the compassionate one. Mm-hmm. And in the story, and I tell chapters 1 through 4, and then the women with the tambourines at the end as a 25-minute story. And so when Moses is talking to God, God self-identifies as the one who's done what Pharaoh's daughter already did. He sees the suffering of his people, he hears their cries, and he has compassion on them. And so I don't know that can be communicated in just the 2 chapters, but that's part of the larger, telling of it that I've crafted that gets into it. So what about you two? You also made choices with your character. Tell us about your Pharaoh's daughter.
So with the Pharaoh's daughter, I guess for me, I didn't focus on her as much. I focused on Miriam. Well, we found out later it's Miriam, the baby sister, older sister, and her mom. And I guess, it's interesting when I thought about just the not the irony, but I guess when the Pharaoh's daughter saw the child and took him as his own, I start just thinking, I can't come up with an example, but I think that happens a lot, where even when people come from a community of being oppressed and others, adopt them, they look at them a little bit differently because it's their own, I guess, until they do something that reminds them of the people that are oppressed. But so I guess I didn't really focus on the Pharaoh's daughter as much in the same way. Yeah.
There's plenty to focus on.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
What about you, Suzanne?
Well, not a whole lot to say, but one of the things I noticed when I was looking at the verbal threads or how words were repeated was Pharaoh's daughter was mentioned 4 times. I mean, in that tiny short piece of her story, Pharaoh's daughter, Pharaoh's daughter, Pharaoh's daughter, Pharaoh's daughter, and also baby, 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 baby. And I just sort of made a little parallel between those. And I think if somebody's name or somebody's mentioned that many times, then it's something to focus on or think about.
Yeah, good. So somebody else of our 4 wanna?
Well, can I say something about Simone's? I loved, in my experience with this story, there's these 3 major chapters. There's the opening up, and then there's Pharaoh and Shiphrah and Puah, and then there's Moses being born, right? And I chose in my digital telling to separate those out, to fade out, to give some time. But I still think sometimes I forget how the story connects. And Simone, you had such a smooth way of bringing me back to the fact that it's the people getting too strong and getting enormous. This is coming to a head, right? And it just made sense to me in terms of your story of the 4 felt like a whole story. Does that make sense? And I especially you were using very different words than our NRSV. You could tell those of us, even me, mine was pretty different too, but I still held on to NRSV a lot. And I didn't feel like there was any of that in yours. And I like that. It freshened it up for me.
So I did change the translation. When I first told this story about 5 years ago, I told it in NRSV, and I was in ABS, and that's what it was part of the assignment, right? But I chose contemporary English version because I thought that version fit my communication style, and I wanted it to be conversational.
Yeah, it felt very conversational.
Yeah, I kind of see it as when families get around telling stories. And I thought about when my own, my parents or grandparents shared stories, and even if there were stories of struggle, but there's still kind of hope because they push through and, and they sit around just kind of telling you about it. And even if there's those tense moments, there comes, there's some humor in it. So I kind of treat it as, I wanted to be I'm just kind of telling you a story. Yep. And so I went for contemporary. Now, I did make some changes in phrases. In the contemporary English version, it says something like they work them even though the Israelites were mistreated, and I'm thinking mistreated, That
Yeah.
sounds like a slap on the hand, you know? Yeah, I need to go back to oppressed. So I did borrow some phrases. And there was something else. It hasn't come to mind that I consciously changed. But yeah, I wanted it to be conversational. And I guess it's more my personality.
Yeah.
Of it. Yeah. So
They were fertile. That's what I like. They were fertile. That was good.
I liked in that you were just mentioning the terms slave bosses and cruel, the choices there, rather than, you know, overseers or something that doesn't sound as harsh as slave bosses and the word cruel. I thought those were good choices.
Yep. And I like those Israelites, they're getting numerous. We got to do something about this. There are going to be more of them than us. That just sounded very contemporary, I suppose.
It felt like I had a sense that I knew a little bit more of what the Pharaoh was trying to do. I've learned as a storyteller, I just know the three. If it gets too much, they'll join our enemy. In case of a war, they'll join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. But you took some time with that to where it made sense. It put in Pharaoh's shoes in a very powerful way.
yeah.
I was going to say with Jason's so it's interesting. Jason's, he was both the storyteller as an editor and as the one in front, on both sides of the camera, he was a storyteller. And I thought it was when that violin music came in, and then he said, kill them, and the music cut right as he was saying that. I thought that was a really interesting, it created emotion. So as Sarah's question about what is he conveying, but what emotions does it awaken in you? It was just like, that was what that woke for me.
Yeah, and I mean, like when you're making it, I'm adding in more layers, right? So I'm adding in music, I'm adding in imagery, and so it's like I have more things that I can tweak than just telling it, right? Like not just telling it, nothing about just telling it. But obviously, when Phil gave the opportunity that we could pre-record it and do some stuff with it, I wanted to make those choices. But I think I specifically, the minute that you add more layers and you have more choices to make, right?
Yeah. One of the things, Phil, I appreciated about your telling was just how you use your body. Particularly when you engage the camera more and come closer. That was really effective. It really kind of drew me in more. And I don't know, I mean, you have a great way of using body movements.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that.
It's so we're all getting more experience of this working in a Zoom format, right? But it makes a difference if you're just seeing the faces. Like Donna's telling of the resurrection story, and she used this much of her body, right? But she said so much with her eyebrows and her eye movements and her face. So that was really cool. But then, like when you can step back, you get a little more of the body. And I wanted you to see the baby, and you can't see the baby. It's like I'm holding my baby right now and you can't see it. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to stand up, and I wanted to do this. I kind of wanted him to go off the screen, which he does a little bit there. But it's interesting how the different medium changes things. One thing I noticed in Suzanne's was that when Pharaoh was speaking, so she was talking to us. We were Israelites. We were Hebrews when she was talking to us. But when Pharaoh said, first time he talked to his people, look, the people of Israel, she didn't make eye contact with us. She was talking to people over here and over here. I don't know if this was intentional, Suzanne, but it wasn't like she was giving us a clue. You're whom we're supposed to identify with. And I thought that was a really nice thing you can do digitally. I don't know, you could even do that. There are ways you could do it live, but it wouldn't be as easy as the digital technology allows.
Yeah, I think, Suzanne, I think you have a good sense of who you're telling to. I think sometimes we can forget sort of when we're telling to a camera that does free us up to then make even more spatial designations, which, I mean, just like what Phil said, it was really, but I also like Suzanne. It's easy to play the King of Egypt like hyperbolically. Your King of Egypt was very chill. Like he just struck me as, sometimes it's easy for us to make the evil ones really evil. And it's the same way that I appreciate about Simone, is that you're making choices that make me relate to the king of Egypt, which maybe I don't really want to do. So it's a good challenge.
I'm curious, Suzanne, I made a note because I was trying to debate about how I was going to portray Shipra and Pua. I mean, what was your approach? What was your thought process behind that? I don't know. I just noticed.
Yeah, they are the reason I love this story so much, and I feel like they are making choices to act against power. They're not just accepting things the way they are, and so and the eye contact there was also very intentional. So when they look up and make eye contact with Pharaoh, they are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. That I felt like they were taking a stand against the power.
Yes, amen. I feel like I made that same choice. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Was there any things that the storyteller struggled with that you're like, oh, that's how that works? Like when you're watching somebody else, you're so much to deal with it. As I first to the story,
Right.
The context for what it means that the Pharaoh doesn't know Joseph. And I skipped the genealogies, but watching all three of you, I realized, okay, I left something out that maybe is really important in the story. So I'm wondering if and I might rethink that in the future. So is there other things like that where you're like, oh, or I want to steal that next time I tell it?
I really like Simone's translation. Like when you move to Pharaoh making an announcement to his people that throw every baby boy into the Nile, it seemed like an actual reaction from his encounter with Shipra and Pua, which of course it is, right? Like as a storyteller, that makes sense, but I always just kept them separate.
Yeah.
More frustrated. He's going to make a decree to all of these people, right? Because the midwives aren't doing what they're supposed to do. I like that a lot.
I apologize. I'm getting some I don't know, some static. And I don't know if it's on my end or not. I just wanted to share that.
Okay.
Yeah. So I heard part of most of what you said. So.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to Zoom is always going to cut when I'm talking specifically. That's just my experience.
Okay.
And it makes me not want to talk at all.
So what translations did you all use? I mean, I'm curious. I know, Jason, you said NRSV. Phil,
very little. I actually used the Common English Bible mostly.
Oh.
I still had an NRSV background, or I had an NRSV base.
Okay.
We had a question too from somebody, Beth. Simone, were you talking about the CEV, the Contemporary English Version? Because I use CEB with the B as in boy, B as in Bible. I use the Common English.
Okay. Yeah, I use CEV.
Got it.
Yeah.
Mine is mostly based on New International, but with looking back at Hebrew and replacing some words that I thought were more specific.
Okay.
I'm very proud that I think Phil and Suzanne, you went with the bitumen and pitch, which I couldn't say it. It got stuck in my mouth a lot, and the Common English Bible was great because you just sealed it with black tar. And I was like, thank you. I can understand that.
Well, let me ask the question that, that is like the open question about that story is about the midwives. And so some translations say Hebrew midwives, and some say midwives, and some say midwives of the Hebrews. And some are adamant in their comments that say, it does not say midwives of the Hebrews, it says Hebrew midwives. So I really did not purposefully leave out that word, but looking back at my video, I just said midwives. I left out the word Hebrew, and I didn't really mean to. So what is your take on these midwives? Why would Pharaoh come to them to ask them to do this? Who are they?
They're the So I want to just make an acknowledgement. It appears Jason and I are not streaming as well as the rest of you. There's been comments to say that. We have two people on the same, running through the same internet because my facilitator is too, and so that might be affecting our bandwidth. But I might be breaking up and you might not even know what I'm saying right now. But
You're clear. You're clear.
I think it's important that they're protecting their own community. And so I see them as Hebrew midwives, and that's what gives them the impetus to resist and the desire to do that. So that's my take on that.
I mean, I think the Pharaoh is running out of options because he says, like, he's looking to limit the community, like Simone, I think, told really well. So then his next step is to figure out, well, I can go to some midwives because they're there right then. They can just cut the line and we're good. And that's what made me think of how much I love Simone, because then Simone's telling, because then he comes back again and makes the order to everybody. So he tries first with some people on the ground. That's how I see it.
So we're going to open this up to other people. If you,
yeah, can we? Elizabeth just made one. I don't know if we want to. That's a really good question.
we'll have Elizabeth. We'll go with Elizabeth's first. So Elizabeth, if you want to unmute yourself and get your video on, you can ask it. And you can either write in the chat.
Am I back?
You're there.
Well, I wrote some. Am I back?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know whether I'm on or not, but my question was, did anybody consider that the Pharaoh's daughter's actions were also in defiance of her father?
I mean, it's real good. That's a real good question.
Yep. I'm assuming that. But I'm assuming you don't have a lot of context.
See it. I didn't see it in anyone's story, and I just wondered if you had thought about it and rejected it, or
I guess
because it's very interesting.
Yeah.
You bring.
Sorry, Simone.
Oh no, I'm sorry, Elizabeth. No, I didn't think about it, and at the same time, I thought about it. Well, she's Pharaoh's daughter. There's always exceptions. But yeah, I hadn't thought about it in the sense of at least portraying it like defiance, because she was from royalty and exceptions are made for royalty. And I guess I go back to thinking about, it's like a privilege in the sense that she could adopt someone from an oppressed community. It would have been okay.
Yeah.
It's okay until, of course, Moses later, killed an Egyptian, right? Wrong, but it was, I just looked at it as probably was okay because she was the king's daughter.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I had not thought about that, about her defiance. And the whole story to me is about the women standing up to power, with the mother and the daughter and the midwives all acting and standing up to power. And I've thought a lot about those three and that question. And I never thought about Pharaoh's daughter in that same way. It has not crossed my mind. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Mary Beth had a hand up. I don't know if she was trying to get in.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I really, first of all, I loved all of the storytellers and everything that you did. And everyone's variations helps to see the story in more dimension. So you hear a certain line said a certain way, someone else says it a certain way, another way, until finally you get even a more holistic experience. Mm-hmm. My question is, this is what I was thinking about. I was thinking about Pharaoh's daughter also, and I wondered what her relationship was like with her father. Mm-hmm. And I wondered and thought perhaps she didn't read the paper. Mm. And somehow she was excluded. She was in a bubble. So, keeping the news that her father was a murderer and planning to kill little boys. Oh. My other question is, why don't we name the women in the story? We've got 5 women. Why don't we say Miriam because we know her name, why don't we say Jochebed? And I've told this story before with Shelley, and we looked up, Pharaoh's daughter has a name too, Bithia or Bithiah. And I wonder why we don't name them?
Mm.
We make modifications in the way we tell the story.
Mm.
So, yep.
Great question. Yeah.
Those are that's all. It was wonderful. Everything was wonderful.
Part of my response would be that it's key that the mother is the mother, right? So when her name comes up, it has to do with, it's not simply her name. She went and got the child's own mother. And that connection might be a little looser if we went with the name.
Right. I agree with Lori in the chat. I mean, so then when Moses finally does get named, there is a piece of like this was all leading up to that. It's fascinating to me that Shiphrah and Puah get named.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I wanted to name my daughter Winnie Puah after Winnie Mandela and Puah. Luckily, my wife was also had a say in this, and it didn't happen. So we went with Bob Marley. No. Bob Marley, Ruge-Jones. Wouldn't that have been a great name?
Well, I think they're named because they saved a generation, not a generation, but a people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are very few women named in the Bible. And why are these two named?
Yeah, I mean, in a certain way too, like Pharaoh isn't named either, right? He's just Pharaoh. Like, I think there is an interesting piece around those who have privilege in this story and those who don't. Because, I don't know, there's something around naming it. I feel like, Simone, you're going to say something.
No, actually got distracted by the comment. I looked at it.
It happens.
Sometimes, I mean, there are some biblical scholars who argue when you don't name, you leave a greater openness for identification.
Mm.
And so like, if you're a mother and you're hearing the story, the mother of the child, you're like, oh, that's my title. Whereas if it's a name, it's a particular mother. It's not somebody you would identify with. So I don't know if that, you have to kind of monitor yourself and see how that functions, if that's the way it functions or not. But that's how some people think that the not giving a name makes it more open for other people to enter into the door.
Well, and to Mary Beth's point, for those of us who start at the beginning of Exodus, all it is names. It's just ironic.
Somebody was asking about why are they killing the people who are building their cities and such, right? If they're going to kill all the male children, what's their long-term building plan? If that's what they're doing. And I think that people do that a lot. We depend on immigrants for our food and things, and yet people turn on them and say, well, you're the problem. You're becoming more numerous, more powerful than we are. We're going to get you out of the picture without thinking about the consequences or the indebtedness we have to those people. So that would be part of my response.
Yeah, they're not overly concerned with paying reparations to the Hebrews. They need them for what they need them for, and then they're afraid of them for what they can be, which I think is incredible. We see that throughout history with people who are in power over others. I think part of it is he wants to kill the baby boys because he can.
I also saw it as a reaction to, I mean, having them build the cities was more of a reaction to the fact they were growing larger. So let me wear them down so they won't have the energy. I think I researched it. They won't have the energy to conceive. So it wasn't, I guess the way it just seemed, it seemed more of a reaction than a well thought out strategy beforehand. That's how I looked at it.
I agree with Cynthia as far as the tradition in Judaism of calling the books by their first words. I try to do that by bringing in the Hebrew of these are the names, which is of course the name of Exodus in Jewish tradition is these are the names.
So we have a question from Shelley about I can hear myself.
Can you put your headphones on, hon?
Sorry, it's fine. Keep going.
I don't have them with me. A question from Shelley about I think this is in relation to opening of cities. She says, why do we continue to demand for the opening of cities when we know this will result in more deaths?
Yeah, I was just, when Phil was talking about immigrants and going back to the question that someone posed about why would you kill off people who are building your cities, that thought just popped in my head. Why are we, like in today's world, why do we demand that immigrants who are our workforce, and why are we demanding that practices go on that we know people are going to die from, but I had another comment on another completely different kind of thought way. When all four tellings were so good and so varied, and it struck me that Jason's telling with the digital format was, it was really effective in this virtual environment. There wasn't the distraction of when are we looking at a digital piece and when are we listening to the teller. It allowed the two to meld in a way that was really effective. And I thought Simone and Suzanne both did a really good job. And you mentioned some of the things that were done, Phil, of using the camera to tell in a more, let's call it a more traditional format. And Phil, your version of standing up so we could see your whole body was most like, for me, what we would see if we were at a festival gathering, where you can see the person's whole body when they're telling. And it was just interesting how the four different ways kind of shed a light in a different way on the story. So
I noticed in some of the pre-events where we had different storytellers tell, we had 4 storytellers of the spotlight storytellers, that you have a different energy when you stand than when you sit. And so that kind of influenced my decision too. It's a little more dangerous too, because I'm prone to pace. And that's like, that'll make you nauseous in a small frame when you're bouncing around. But
well, I think it also, Shelley, you're speaking to another point, which is I think the 4 of us, we told the story the best way we can, recognizing that stories are meant to be told, I think, in community, like in face-to-face community. They can be told virtually too, and I think we're learning how to do that. Sometimes you bring all that energy. Sometimes I've seen storytellers who are acting like they're in a room of 250 people, but they're not. And so it's weird, right? Like it's you got to like walk this line,
right,
of who your audience is.
Yeah,
it's funny. That is one area of storytelling that is a lot of physical movement. So if I'm having a conversation and I may move my hands a little bit. So I consciously sometimes just want to only keep my hands still and maybe use them when I think it's needed. And I would say in this environment, I probably use my hands much less, just because you may not be able to see everything the way I'm sitting. And then I recall storytellers who just sit and tell, and you have the same effect. And so sometimes I aspire, like, if I can sit and tell a story and connect with the audience, that's huge for me, because I don't have to keep up with, wait a minute, am I looking right? Am I looking left? I mean, I would just become confused. So that's just an area of growth for me, to use body movements. Not saying I have to tell like Phil, because we're all different, but I just try to minimize it, because I may confuse you and me at the same time. So our area.
A thing I saw that was helpful in thinking about if you're doing more just like the frame. So I don't know if it's still on. I was going to look this morning, but the Harry Potter website, Pottermore, told the first volume of Harry Potter with different celebrities telling each one. And I think it was like the 5th chapter, they had the actors from The Cursed Child, the Broadway play, that's a Harry Potter play. and the guy was amazing. What he did with his eyes and with facial expressions it just blew me away. And so if anyone's looking for somebody to watch and say, how do you work in this medium? I watched lots of people on that, right? I probably saw 15, 20 different people telling. That's the one I remember because he was just amazing. And there were other gifted people like Daniel Radcliffe and who played Harry Potter and such. But
there was, and I don't know, it's getting close, well, okay, getting kind of close to time. There was a comment earlier, and I was just thinking about, it said, well, why would they kill the people that's working, or even the reference to immigrants? I don't know, I would offer up that they didn't see them as people. You know, they saw them as less than that. And so disposable, I mean, you serve a purpose. And that's, I don't know, that's why I was just thinking, I don't think it was a care because they didn't think of them as humans.
I think that, I think it was Phil, that let the girls live was sort of an afterthought. Was that Phil or was that Jason?
Well,
Okay.
I took it from Phil.
Okay, and so I've always thought it as part of the genocide, is like kill the boys and then impregnate the girls. And that way lose that whole, you know, the nationality of people. And so I've always thought that letting the girls live was a very calculated choice.
I take it as Pharaoh isn't worried about women, and they're the ones who bring him down in this story, right? So I take it as that tension. Oh, women, what could they possibly do? What threat are they? And then, you know, the midwives, Pharaoh's daughter, his sister, his mother are the ones that get this whole Exodus process happen.
We have several questions coming in on the comments, Phil.
Okay.
So the first one I saw was Danette, and then Nathan, and then Kathleen. I don't know if you want to ask your own questions. Danette didn't type in a question, I don't think so.
Well, let's go with Danette first.
You need to unmute Danette.
Danette.
Danette, did she? There you go.
Oops.
Okay, you're unmuted.
No, we still can't hear you. Danette, we still can't hear you. You might have to go through Zoom. I would go to the Zoom preferences and make sure.
Or
I'm sorry.
If you want to type in your question, I will ask it for you. Okay, so then Nathan had a question about the reeds, repetition of the word reeds, and wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, I like the fact that, so correct me if I'm wrong, but like, isn't it, we call it the Red Sea, but it's a sea of reeds. Is that right? So like there's a piece, at least I'm thinking about back to my story that like, that you're placing him among the reeds as a way of almost like hiding him again. But like how horrific it is that you have to put you've hid your child for 3 months, and then you put him among the reeds so he's not seen again. To me, it seems overwhelmingly, it's just too much.
Beth made the observation earlier that when Moses' mother did that, she was actually obeying the command of Pharaoh to put him in the Nile, and she did it. Right?
Oh, wow.
But she just did it in such a way that he didn't die from it. So
I think the reeds, if the crossing and the Exodus happens by going through the Reed Sea, there are several clues that are telling us this is what's coming down the road. Another is Moshe. So his name means, it's the verb for what he does eventually. He takes the people out through the waters. It's really hard to render that appropriately, but it's the same action. What Pharaoh does by pulling him out of the waters is what he's going to do for the whole people of God with Miriam and Aaron's help, pulling them out through the water. And so I think that there's like subtle clues of where this story is going that are sown in the beginning.
And then if you're going to tell the whole thing, right? It's like, so for Phil, he's planning when Moses is an adult and walking along, he's humming that same that he got from his mother. He's humming that same song. So like that's something you would see if you saw even more, which I think is just really mature storytelling, is that you recognize that wherever you're telling in the Bible, you're telling a small piece of a much bigger story. It's like telling Jonah 3 without having the angel recognize at all that like God ordered Jonah and Jonah didn't do it the first time. So how would God order Jonah again?
So we have a question from Kathleen, who is a newer storyteller. She's wondering about choices that you make along the way. You're all talking about choices you made. What are the first choices you make and how do you make them?
First choice is which story you're going to tell and where it begins and where it ends. That's what my answer would be. The answer for me is you pick a story you love and that already you connect with, and that will make you want to learn it. And the second thing, so that's not quite the question, is first you pick what story you want to tell, and then you commit to somebody that you're going to tell it publicly, because otherwise you might never learn it. At least I don't. So if I don't have an end date where I'm going to tell it publicly, I have a real hard time internalizing it.
Oh, and for me, Kathleen, welcome to the world of storytelling, A. B, I would say, when you start to sit with it and learn it by heart, I think there's just generally, you're going to come up against points where you're wondering, how is Jesus feeling in this moment? That I think sometimes you just don't, like, I think lectors, anybody who reads the Bible out loud, they're all making choices. Sometimes they don't think that they are, but if you read it boring, it's going to end up being a boring story, right? So I think there is a piece of it that it's really about, like, you're always making choices. Sometimes they're not that big, but you are, because the story's coming through you and it's coming out through your voice.
Are you getting a little reverb with us when we speak? Don't worry about it. Never mind.
Not anymore.
A little bit.
Okay. Suzanne, Simone, do you have it?
I saw one of the first gesture type choices in Phil's story was where he did the opposite thing with oppressed and grew, or
Yeah, I like
oppressed
that too.
and multiplied. And it was very opposite. And I think those are some choices that, like, not using gestures throughout your whole story, but when you do use them, what are the choices and what are you saying with them?
So, so some of the choices, or at least one of the choices I made, was how, I mentioned earlier how I was going to tell the story. And even as when I characterized Pharaoh, I saw it, I don't know, I kind of immersed myself in it. I mean, I just connected to the story and between contemporary times and how people feel when they feel threatened by a community of people, and that's how I connect with. So I spend a lot of time just trying to put myself in the story sometimes, and sometimes I connect with it differently. And when I told this story 5 years ago, I approached it as, and it's still a story of hope, but it was about when faith meets water. Like, there's stories where water is the central part of the story, and there's a movement of faith. Yeah. And that was kind of where I was coming from when I told this story, and more so focusing on the birth of Moses. And quite honestly, when I was connected with the story this time, other things showed up, right? I've started looking at it through a different lens. And so any emotions, I kind of like what Sarah said in her keynote 1 about the emotions you feel in a story and how you don't ignore those emotions, but you got to kind of deal with those emotions so they don't get in the way of telling. And so it connected with me differently this time. But I knew that I looked at it, and I don't know if I accomplished this, but I was wanting to tell it like I was talking to the Israelites, and you're telling someone in the future, and you tell them this story that, but there's a sense of hope in it, like, but God has our back, and so I don't know if I accomplished that, but at least that was going in my head as I was telling it.
Yes. I think another thing to Kathleen's question, which is a great question, is you also remember that the narrator has a voice. I learned that from Phil and his work on the Gospel of Mark. But you as a storyteller, sometimes you need to get into the head of the narrator, which is tricky and not really known. So there's a lot of different directions you can go.
I'm wondering if anyone else faced the challenge that I faced, is when you've heard somebody else tell the story well, escaping from their choices. So like Dennis Dewey, he has a video where he tells this story. I've probably watched it 60 times with students over the years. And so it's just hard for me not to hear his voice when she draws him out. And it's he even says Moshe drew him out. And so I'm wondering how you escape, or if it's even important to escape the voices that that you've heard to make it your own.
I've learned a lot from all of you people. So I'm sure I've put little pieces of everybody in the stories I tell. I don't know that I could separate it.
Jason edited a video of me telling this. So that means he effectively heard me say it more time than I've heard myself say it. You know, you have to run through it 300 times. So that gets in your head.
Then
Dennis?
Then you can do an impersonation of Phil telling that story better than Phil telling that story. But then there are little moments that still end up. So when Phil pointed, like, and she saw the child, it was crying. Like, that is so ingrained in me. That's literally what he does in that telling, right? And I loved it so much, or it just made sense to me. Sorry, Lori.
Okay, we have time for one more comment from Dennis.
I think all of these memories of tellings enrich our telling, and that's what the community is about. It just occurred to me that it may be possible that, Peter was sitting around listening to Jesus and said, that's like going through the eye of a needle. And Jesus said, I got to use that.
Yep. Which is very much the Jesus from Christopher Moore's Lamb.
Yes, of course.
He's working it out as he goes along, especially with Biff.
Yeah. Okay, Marion has the last question then.
Well, we could skip it. I was just wondering, I wanted to ask Jason why he put in the animation of the that story of Exodus 1 on top of it, or well, behind your telling, because your telling was in front of that.
Right. Yeah. I since Phil gave the option to tell it digitally, I wanted, and specifically,
I didn't put myself up.
Either I was trying to say something with, once you make it digitally, I guess I had different choices I could make. And so as somebody who grew up with Prince of Egypt, which is a 1998 animated movie, but I would argue one of the more theologically apt films. Yes, it is animated, but I encourage you to check it out. That informed a lot of my telling, so I wanted to show some of that. But specifically, I wanted to focus on Moses' mother, less so than the daughter of Pharaoh. In the movie, it's a very lovely scene, and the daughter of Pharaoh is so sweet, and Miriam comes up to her, and there's this moment, and I was like, where's Moses' mother in this? And since that's not told in the Prince of Egypt, I could use another part of the Prince of Egypt for my own benefit, which it's the power of editors, and also not always, sometimes it can be very scary what editors can do, right? But this is just for a lovely gathering in the SI.
What it did for me when Jason did that was I realized, like, that's what it means that boy babies are being killed. So it kind of, that we know the story so well, it just sounds non-threatening, but when you see the babies, those graphics of the babies being put in the water, it just changed the story for me. I want to thank everyone who showed up, and I want to thank Lori, who ran much of our text for us today. We appreciate that. And Trina, whom you may not even see on the screen, who is worked really hard to train some hard to train people to be able to bring you the technology we use. So if you could do this, this is how I do applause. Sign language applause for our tech people. We really appreciate that. I hope you enjoyed this time together. I certainly did. It was a fun conversation. I'm really